Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to 19.1 Launch Week and today's webinar, What's New in Dashboards, Reporting, and Analytics, presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher and DevExpress CTO Julian Bucknall. In this session, we'll learn how we're reshaping our data analytics product line and see how you can deliver more in less time with version 19.1. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today, and we will send the link to the recording in a follow-up email. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. We do have members of the dev team online with us, so they will try and get to all of your questions as best they can. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul and Julian.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Now, before I introduce Julian, I want to let everybody know that 19.1.3 is released. Good morning, Julian.
Hey, I was supposed to do that bit. And good morning, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Yes, we released this morning, or if you're in Australia, late last night. And please do go and download, but preferably after this webinar, because we've got a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. Dashboards, reporting, and data analytics, which is going to encompass charting as well. Now, one of the biggest challenges when we start looking at what's new across this range is the fact that it touches just about every platform. So I'm going to take you through reporting this morning, and I'll take you through dashboards, and then Julian, you can finish up with the charting at the end. It is going to be fast-paced. There's going to be a lot of switching between the different demos, so we will just jump straight in and start having a look at what's new. As I mentioned, we're going to be starting out with the the reporting demos, and I'm going to be running that from the demo center. Moving over to reports now, the first thing we're going to look at is hierarchical reports, and that's a word that's been coming up a lot throughout these last few days, isn't that right, Julian?
Absolutely. Hierarchical certainly seems to be the term of the day. We've got hierarchical this, that, and the other. So obviously our data is becoming more organized, perhaps. I don't know.
Certainly is. We can see from this demo report here, I'm going to use the WinForms reports demos for probably most of what we're doing until I get out of the all platforms area. But we can see that we've got the region being the parent in this report, and then the countries sitting inside each region. So that's the tree style element that's being represented. From the report perspective, I can collapse and expand, and I'm going to take you through the designer aspects of that in a second as well. But now basically using the detail band, you can specify that you want to have this hierarchy style report. And there's two different types of data structures that we can work with. Traditionally, you'd have a parent-child relationship, so you can use a key field name and a parent field name, or you may have a self-reference structure where you only need the child list field name in there. So imagine the likes of an employee list where you want a management hierarchy, but it's still just a flat list. When you're inside the report designer, you can actually come into the detail band, and as we move through the properties panel, you'll see that I've got this hierarchy options group across here, and in this instance we're using a key field name and the parent field name, and then you've got the ability of setting the indent level. Of course, if I was using the self-referencing, you'd have the entry inside the child list field. You'll notice as well that we've got this checkbox which is drill down expanded. So when the report renders, it's going to show all the details automatically expanded. And it's saying that we want the drill down to be controlled by this checkbox, which is sitting over here in the design surface. A couple of things that I want to draw your attention to if you're going to be using this style of report, and that is related to the anchor properties on the elements. Because of the indent, if you don't actually set the anchors, then you'll end up with the columns shifting slightly, and it will make for a bit of a mismatch on your report. So you can see in this example for the numeric columns, I've got the anchor horizontal set to right and the anchor vertical to both. Whereas for the region, I'm simply anchoring on both, and it will just help step into that nice display. So if we preview that again, we can see that everything's aligned regardless of the level that it's sitting at. So next we'll take a look at the merge reports. Now, prior to version 19.1, when you were doing report merging, you'd have to utilize some code behind if you wanted to achieve some very special circumstances. So what we have now is inside the designer, we've got a new property on the sub-report element. Again, I'm just using a standard one of the demo templates. I'm going to scroll down and find this chart sub-report. Now there's a property sitting over here, and it's the all-important one called generate own pages. When I disable that, you'll see that I can position my sub-report as I would normally to be incorporated into the main report. When I turn that parameter on, it automatically takes up the whole width of my report. And that's because the sub-report is now in charge or responsible for creating its own report pages. If we look at the preview on that, we can see exactly what I mean. Scroll down. Actually, I'll do as many pages and take a look. Thank you, Malwarebytes, for your little pop-up there. Free advertising. So we've got the individual pages, which is generated from the data. We can see our table of contents, but then you can also see, I'll zoom in a little, that we've got our chart rendering as a landscape page. So from that perspective, you no longer have to add code behind or do complex code document merging approaches. And there's some major advantages for that, such as you can export the document now in a continuous single file. You can also use the interactive features that require rebuilding the document, such as the drill down or sorting or report parameter input. That's all encompassed in that new feature. And you're also able to open the page setup window for a merge report and change the margins in the print preview window. And then finally, watermarks are also preserved upon document creation. Now, what's really cool about using this particular feature is that the table of contents and the document map can be automatically created for a report merged from a parent and sub-reports. So it's going to take care of making sure that all that is in place. And we can see here, just from this document map, produce has multi-pages as children, yet the produce chart as a single element at the end is also incorporated. Next, I want to talk about the JSON data source. In this version, we've added the ability to do authentication. So what I'm going to do is very quickly create a new report. I'm going to add my data source to this report, and I'm going to choose a JSON data source. But before that, I need to make sure that in my clipboard, I have a correct URL. I'm just using the Northwind demo. And as I step through the data source, this next screen allows me to provide some valuable details if I'm wanting to implement that authentication. So we've added support for basic HTTP, we've added support for token-based authentication, and you can see here we've also got query string parameters. Now the intricacies particularly surrounding token style authentication, you can get information from the documentation on how to best apply that, but certainly a welcome addition to that data source. A non-visible item for a second is the SQL data source now will only execute required queries. So in other words, if you've got your data source in there and there's a number of queries that aren't being utilized by either the report or a control, a calculated field or a parameter, it's not going to actually get executed. which is going to reduce the traffic to and from your application and the database server, which of course is going to give you a performance improvement. Whilst I've got this report open, I'm going to show you a couple of things with the checkbox, the humble checkbox. If I look over into the parameters windows over here, we can see that it's now got full support for SVG icons. And you can see in the list here, there are some standard entries in there. You've got some nice layouts. I particularly like things like the smiley one. But you've also got full support for doing custom glyphs. So as I expand this property, I can assign an image to each and every one of those as an SVG image. Now, one example of using the checkbox with those SVG elements, and again, I think a really good example of using checkboxes in a report, is this vehicle inspection report. We can see they've been used pretty heavily all the way through, but in different ways. As I scroll through, we've got all the different styles. We've got those smiley faces in full, where it's easy to see what's been represented, and the ticks and crosses across that, all the way through to a traditional tick and empty box with that as well. So personally, I think that's a great use of the SVG. You know that it's going to render properly, and also just the different ways that you can use the checkbox throughout that.
And I'd have to say, I wish my dealer would have this application, because the way they do their inspection reports, it's like scribbled out the wazoo.
Well, you could always ask them to maybe start using our products, Julian.
I'll try that, yes.
Next is the XR label control. We've added the ability to use HTML-inspired text formatting. Now, it's an interesting phrase, but it's a subset of pseudo HTML tags that are currently supported by our WinForm controls. And on this slide here, I've just got an example of some of the markup that you can use and what that would actually render like inside the report or the report designer. So again, that can be quite useful. I don't know about what you're seeing, but I'm getting a lot of flicker happening with GoToWebinar at the moment, so I apologize for that.
It's looking all right from here.
Sorry?
It's looking all right from here, so don't worry.
We'll take a look inside the designer and at the next element I want to show, which is the summary editor. Using the smart tag here, I've got the ability of actually getting to a summary. This has been around for a while, where you can select what you want happening to a particular field. But now if I choose this ellipsis, I can actually invoke the summary editor. I can select very easily what I want my summary running from, say group, and then I've got this list of summary functions. One of the things that's also available as a new feature for the summaries is the ability to calculate weighted average. So not only have we got this nice summary editor, the team have also added in a new function for that calculation. And of course here, just to get rid of that error, I should pick up, it doesn't really matter. And I'm now going to be calculating my weight based on another value. The weighted average calculation is also available inside your expression editor using some WAVG for average. I'll leave that on screen just for a second as I talk about another non-visual element, and that is some new security settings applied to resource access on your reports. So inside the DevExpress security namespace, we've added an access settings class which allows you to define some different access rules for those resources. For example, you might want to alter the way that people can access the report-specific style sheets or layout serialization files. You might want to lock down the static resources, such as the images, or the data resources, being the JSON or Excel files. You can now use the URL access rule and the directory access rule to specify what resources can be loaded from either all or specific URLs or all or specific file directories. You can provide some custom logic and define custom rules to give you that granular control over what's going on there. And then finally, in this general overview, we've got the XR pivot grid is now set to use the in-memory data processing engine as a default. So again, an improvement in performance. What I want to do now is jump over to Visual Studio and invoke the Visual Studio Report Designer. So at the moment, I've got a basic project. I'm going to right-click inside the project and say add a DevExpress item from the context menu and add a report. Just hit OK on the dialog and I'll just create a blank report for now. A couple of properties I want to highlight here. The first one is the image picker. So I'm going to drag a XR picture box over here, and what we'll see now, when we invoke the lookup for the image source, it's actually going to use the DX image picker control, giving you access to any of the resources inside your project, our collection of raster images, or of course our ever-increasing collection of vector images, and you can just quickly choose from there. Now, whilst I'm in here, one thing that applies to both the Visual Studio Designer and also your end user report designer for WinForms, and I'm going to be going through more of the individual platforms in a second, are some really nice new functionalities. For example, I have a File Explorer open somewhere down here, and in this File Explorer I've got some SVGs. What I can now do is literally copy and paste, and the designer will determine that, hey, this is an image, and therefore draw an extra picture control or an XR picture and paste that information in. At the same time, I could literally drag and drop an SVG file onto there as well. That in itself is, for me, a very welcomed feature, because you might be working in, say, Photoshop or your favorite graphics program and actually be thinking it would be really nice to be able to just say, I don't know, paste a signature in there that you've worked on. And literally this came straight out of Photoshop, and I figured I can now start signing checks as Julian.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Now, not only have we added support for doing that with images, you can also do it for text, rich text, docx, HTML. Whether that's copy and paste or drag and drop, it will create the necessary component on this design surface. So the XR picture box and the XR label or the XR rich text. And you can also drag another report definition into that design surface, and it will replace what's going on with the active report as well. So that's really quite nice. I'll come back to looking at WinForms in a second, but right now we're going to jump back to a browser and take a look at the ASPNET Core products. Now, Julian, one of the questions that I get asked a fair bit, and I'm just going to hand it to you for 1 second, that's what's the difference between when somebody mentions ASPNET Core versus .NET Core?
Fairly simple, really. .NET Core is just your, I was going to say basic framework, but we can't call it framework anymore, so because it gets confusing with the .NET framework. So it's a collection of assemblies that can be, used as part of your local support for your applications and all that kind of stuff. ASP.NET Core is built on top of that for your rendering of your applications over the web. That's basically it.
Excellent. So the reporting engine has been ported to use the ASP.NET Core framework, again, use of that word. And in version 19.1, we've added the support for the XR rich text control. So that can now be used inside your ASP.NET Core reporting libraries. We've also added support for JSON localization files using our localization service. Now, some people may not be aware of the fact that we offer a localization service. So once you log into your DevExpress account and you go to localization.devexpress.com, you can actually come in and request translations for quite a large range of different libraries and have them included inside your projects. And one of the things that we've seen in this release is the JSON support for those localization languages. Another thing for ASP.NET Core reporting is the inclusion of TypeScript definitions. So as a result, you can now get better support or code completion inside whichever development environment you're using with those TS extension files. And finally, for ASP.NET Core, we've added the ability for you to include custom configuration providers to the web report designer. Let's take a jump now directly over to WinForms itself. I'll switch back to the WinForms demo and start talking about some of the things that have been included across the board here. First of all, let's talk Data Federation, and I'm not talking Star Wars.
No, Star Trek Federation. Oh. Hey, I'm old enough to remember, okay?
The whole reason behind Data Federation is the ability to bring in multiple data sources and have them combined in a single set of queries that you can join data together. Now the question would be, well, why might I want to do that? Why is that useful? Where's the data going to come from? So it could just be that you're using a legacy system or a large enterprise system. One of the comments that were passed on is that we're dealing with a post-GDPR world where certain sensitive parts of data might be stored in a well-protected database somewhere else, and you still got to join certain elements together. In version 19.1, the Data Federation data source supports the join operation. Now, we've already had people asking if we're going to start supporting things like union, and the answer is yes, but that's going to be later on down the track. So let's take a look at what's actually involved in creating a set of federated data. I've got a blank report. I'm going to come straight to data source and add a new data source. I'll choose my database for that and just my Northwind connection and just throw in the customers table. Now in this particular example, I'm just going to be adding data sources. I'm not too worried about the fact that they don't really mesh. I'll be showing you a much cleaner example when I get to dashboards. So I'm going to add another data source. This time we'll go with the JSON element again. I'll just grab that URL and next, and then I'll leave everything fully selected. And then the third time I'm going to choose a new data source, and I'm going to choose this Data Federation option from the data source wizard. Choose next. This is where it's going to show me everything that's available and ask what I want to do. So literally you'd go through, you could come through and create a query, and you can come through and manage your relationships where you could set up your dependencies between the multiple elements there. Again, more of that later on. The idea here is just to show you how easy it is inside the report designer to get to that point. If I switch to my field list, you can now see that I've got this federation data source which would be combining the results of those particular elements. Another new thing for WinForms Report Designer is the reusable bands templates. So let's switch to something a little more exciting like the invoice report again. Jump into the designer. Now previously for WinForms, we've had the report gallery where we could drag and drop component or collection of components and reuse them. Now what we can do is actually click on the band and, bring up the context menu of the band and actually say add to gallery, which means we can do that with a detail band, we can do that with the header band, etc., making it a lot easier to work with the creation of reports as we go through. Another feature inside the report designer here is the ability to use the loop for showing colors. Click on properties, and here I've just got a field selected, and we can see on the right hand side of my foreground color we've got the loop icon. I click on the loop and we have this beautiful large magnifying glass, and you'll see as I go over any element we're going to get the RGB or the hex color from anywhere on screen. It doesn't have to just be within my particular window, it could be anywhere at all. So I'm going to choose the orange from the word invoice. It works if you actually click on the right color, Julian.
You were so close.
I was. There we go, and it will then return the result back into. You think with a magnifying glass that big, I'd
get it right. Yeah.
But that's okay. There's also some other settings that are available inside the refreshed look and feel. If I come to report level, you can see that I've got access to the page settings. So there's a page settings tab, and sometimes it's the simple little things. So if you've got an expression field or a formula and you want to actually know what's in there, you're not always going to have full access to that. So what you can actually do is come along and just position your mouse over the element, and you'll actually get the tooltip showing you exactly what's happening inside that expression, so you don't have to go digging for it. Now we've got the segment colorizers for the XR chart control. That's going to be covered in a lot more detail by Julian. And then you've now got the ability for specifying the page numbers and multiple page ranges to print or export. It sounds duplicitous, but you can also specify duplicate page numbers to print multiple copies of the same page. So that's now a valid range when you do that. Let's jump over and take a look at some of the things that's happening inside the web report designer. For this, I'll jump through, and it doesn't really matter which one I invoke. We'll go for the MVC reporting. Here we're going to see a brand new or an overhauled report wizard, and this reduces the number of pages required to actually create a report, and it opens in full screen. So let's open up the web report designer. I'll wait for it to finish doing its thing, and then I'll close this menu down for a second. So now when I invoke the menu and say new via wizard, we can see that there's a lot more real estate being used to generate the report. I'll say table report and next, and we can see just on this next screen that because of that additional real estate that the team have made available, we're able to incorporate more on the single page, minimizing the number of pages that we actually use to generate that through that wizard. We saw a feature released in 18.1, and so the web report designer now has full support for vertical bands. It also has the JSON data source support and authentication, the TypeScript definitions, so the same as the ASPNET Core, where when you're working inside the development environment, you've got the code completion functionality, and the web document viewer has had a number of performance enhancements done by the way of improved memory consumption. And there's also some new caching methods for both the report design preview and if you're working with Azure reporting. Let's take a quick look at life in WPF. While this loads up, WPF again has received that Data Federation, so you can generate a data source, that federated data source, and combine your different elements. Now, I don't believe I mentioned, but that supports SQL, data source, the Excel, JSON format, entity framework, XPO, and the POCO, or the object data source, when you're generating the federated data source there. One of the things for WPF is now that the end user report designer has full support for the report gallery. So we jump into the designer. Basically, if you've watched any of the other webinars across the years about from when we introduced the report gallery, it's now everything that's available in WinForms has been ported over to WPF. So that's a welcomed option. So here we have the report gallery down here. You've also got those reusable band templates. So again, it's a new feature to version 19.1 for WinForms. It's being brought straight into WPF where you can add that into your gallery, and you're going to see it down here, which you can rename, reuse. Some enhancements for the end user report designer include the ability, if we bring up the properties grid, to actually control your favorites. So when you jump in here, you can then nominate what you want to see on your favorites panel. There's some API updates for docking. You can set the dock panel visibility and behaviors on startup. You've also got the ability to interact with the report gallery at that level as well. As we saw with the WinForms elements, if I jump onto a field and bring up the right button, when you hover over, you've got that same mouse tooltip functionality across the text element. The page dialog, the same as WinForms, where you can control the output or the page setup, visual inside WPF, and the XR chart showing those segment colorizers. WPF also has an export to PDF change. There is full support for OpenType CFF fonts, which is new as well. Before we move on to dashboards directly, there's a couple of things for the report and dashboard server that I'd like to mention. Data models are now supported, the data model now supports custom SQL queries. So in addition to being able to select from tables, views, and stored procs, your main model you can enter some custom SQL, which is available in the SQL data source wizard. You can now also set your DB command timeout. It's now a configurable parameter on the data model. And there's some new support for, or extra support for themes in both the report and dashboard designers. There was one other thing I wanted to show, which I actually have a slide for, and that is, which I think is a really nice feature, the ability to add auto refresh into your dashboard. Now here I'm talking about the dashboard server product, not just the general dashboards, but if you are using that suite, I think it's a great feature that's been added to be able to refresh that data at any given time. Switching tracks now, let's start looking at some of the things that are available with dashboards. I'll just bring up the demo center and launch dashboards. Again, we'll jump in and start looking at the WinForms demo first. I mentioned earlier about the Data Federation. We looked at a couple of samples on how to actually create that data source. Now let's take a look at a good example where the data is being used and generating an actual report. So here we've got the Data Federation example, and we can see that the sales data is coming from the object data source, human resource from Excel, and then we've got some combination of the two. What I'm going to do is jump into the editor, change my data source here to get to Federation, and come across to data source and edit so we can see what's going on. Here's the query builder showing clearly that the two data sources are mapped on this category field, that we're bringing in the manager field, and we've got all the sales fields. So our output table is effectively showing these columns bound from these tables. And of course, you can mix and match as many different data sources. They could be the same data source type, but from different locations. They could be different data source locations or types as well. The OLAP range filter has now got, well, sorry, both the range filter and the date filter support OLAP data sources for all those people that are using cube-style data repositories. Next, we'll take a look at a new control. We start with looking at the sales overview, and we've got this date range control sitting down here. Now, this is a great visualizer for picking a date range. It does exactly what it's supposed to. Has the visual element, allows me to quickly move around. And of course, I've got context-sensitive functions to quickly jump into specific periods. So I could say year-to-date, all those things. But there's been a request that you can actually go in and have a date filter that's not taking up as much real estate, that's not as visual from that aspect. So I'm going to jump down to the customer support presentation here, and we can see that the team's provided just that. What we have is this nice low real estate stealing element where we click on, and we're going to be able to see each of the different things as I click through. Of course, you get to control what's happening in this list, and you can just use set filter if you want to come through and select a custom filter, which would then bind all that data. So a welcomed new component that's been requested. Some changes for the web dashboard. Basically, the team went through and interrogated everywhere that a list could be used. And this could be on drop-downs, could be parameter values, all sorts of things. So let me just run up a web example. And then what they did was said, okay, we've got to come up with a smarter way to allow you to be able to look through this list and select what it is you want, what it is you need. So that's exactly what they did. Let's go down to energy stats. And anywhere now in the web interface where there is a drop-down list, you've now got the ability of providing a quick lookup, quick search type functionality. That in itself, they've been going through literally everywhere that lists can be used and said, is it possible that this particular drop-down can have a few hundred entries in it or more? We then need to improve the way that that could be used. So that's one of the things that they've definitely gone through and done. Now, it is still a work in progress. There are things that they want to continue to improve, but again, it's that iterative things to look forward to between each of our releases. The final thing that I want to talk about for a second is, well, sorry, before I jump off web, as we saw with ASPNET Core, the localization enhancements. So again, that service providing those JSON format translation strings back. I was on the WinForms one before, and there's one very important thing that I wanted to highlight here. And so much so because it's taken a lot of effort from the team to implement, and you'll see. We've got a sales overview board here, and we've now got this new icon sitting over here, and it's implementing state management of your dashboard. This one utilizes, or for examples, one of the things that the team's asked me to convey is that they want you to play with the source code of this particular demo. They want you to understand that implementing state management is really, really easy. And in fact, one of the things that has happened with the WinForms product for this iteration is the fact that they've had to go in and refactor so much code to make this feature available. It was introduced into the web version of Dashboard back in 2016, It was introduced into WPF last year, and it's finally made it into WinForms, which is interesting because normally WinForms drives the other platforms. This has been back to front. But that's because they've had to go in and replace some very, very old parts of the code, a lot of refactoring. And in fact, it took a lot longer than we anticipated to make this functionality available. But it is now there, where you've got state management for your WinForms dashboards. I think, Julian, that means it's time for me to switch over for charting.
Okay, so let me just grab the screen, as it were, and make sure I select my name. That would be bad. Okay, so charting. Thank you, Paul, for reporting and dashboards. So now we go on to the other part of data visualization, if you like. And we've got several things to show here. And what's actually happened is a similar kind of things as has happened to reporting and dashboards, where we've implemented a new feature, new enhancement in one platform and migrated it to other platforms. So I'm basically just going to show the WinForms version of this. So I'll jump over to the charting demo. Notice we're using DirectX within WinForms for charting, so our render speed is much faster than is usual. The first one I want to show is the segment colorizer. So basically this is all about coloring parts of your chart automatically through, in this case, ranges. So here we have daily temperature average over a period of time, and what we've done is we've defined a set of ranges of temperatures here, so 77 to 80, actually I prefer Celsius, yeah. So 25 to 30, 20 to 25, and so on and so forth. We've given them different colors, and then we color the chart according to those colors where they appear on the x-axis, the y-axis. So obviously the red means it's pretty hot, and that's that particular section there, and the slightly dimmer red or less harsh red, if you like, into the next range, and so on and so forth. So you get this kind of lovely way of visualizing temperature in your chart itself. Obviously blue, cold, very cold, to red, very hot, hot. So we can also show a trend colorizer. What we've done here is to say, well, if the temperature's rising at a particular period, we'll color that in red because it's getting hotter, and if it's dropping, then we'll color it blue. And so we have this kind of trend view of the chart. So in essence, not only is the chart providing direct visualization of these points according to time, but we're also showing them in different colors and the different abilities for conveying information to your user. And that's what charts are really all about, is conveying information rather than just looking at a table of data of some description. So segment colorizers, we've seen the range, the trend, point-based colorizers available in WinForms and ASP.NET. Next up is a kind of fascinating one. It's the histogram. We now have the ability to generate histograms for you. So let me just reduce the number of series here. So everyone's going, well, I did. It's been a long time since I learned all this stuff. What exactly is a histogram? So imagine it's basically a statistical way of viewing your data. Imagine the time, doing some kind of survey where I'm weighing different groups of the population and trying to work out some kind of information that I can gather from say the population according to date range. So I measure or weigh people aged 21 to 25 and then 26 to 30 and so on and so forth. And I get this kind of weird dot type thing where my argument are the ages and my values are the weights. And imagine there are people who are very thin and people who are very fat, and you get this kind of weird distribution. You can't really gain much from this information from this. So the histogram is a way of accumulating those points into a more, if you like, recognizable form. So let me reduce the width a little bit of the resulting bar chart. So these are basically the count of each point according to these particular intervals. So let me reduce it even more, and you get some basic shape, if you like. We could also show that as a spline. Sometimes people view bar charts as being histograms, or confuse the two. Histograms are more about the statistical analysis of your data. So histograms, we have an aggregation function for that. Obviously, we're inspired, if you like, by the way Excel does histograms. We have various calculation modes from there: automatic, the bin width and the bin number, interval information display within the axis labels, customizable label text for overflow, and the ability to align grid lines and tick marks with bins, and so on. So histograms available in WinForms, and within WPF, and also within ASP.NET. So histograms. What's next on the list? Oh yes, polar and radar views. Small improvement here, I'd say. We basically just have one axis within polar and radar views because it's defined as a circle essentially. And so the ability now to actually change the angle of the label of these various x-axis values, so we can just change the axis labels to have a different angle. Maybe in some charts that you're going to be generating, this would actually be a lot easier to read. It's just a feature, and that's available in ASP.NET and in WinForms and in ASP.NET. So we also have now the ability to center align axes within the plot area. So imagine you have some kind of chart which goes, your arguments go from something negative to something positive, and the same with your y-axis, your values from something negative to something positive. It makes more sense to have your axes then on the 0 marks of both axes rather than just on the left and on the bottom. So we can center align axes within the chart. Let me jump over now to the WPF charting, and here we have a couple of other features that I can talk about. The first one is, here we are, we've got the segment colorizer. We certainly have the histogram support, as I said earlier. The next one down is the drill down chart. So what we're trying to do here is give you the ability to support some kind of hierarchical data. And yes, it's that magic word again, hierarchical. So you have some kind of data which, if you like, you can drill down into that data and reveal more information about that data. So what we have here is have some horizontal bar charts. Each of these individual segments involve a separate region for this particular sales chart, essentially. So we look down and say, oh, this looks a little small, DevAV West. Let me click on it, and I'm drilling down now into that data for that particular region and that particular sales value, and we can drill down even more and see individual charts and be able to maybe gain more information and understanding. We can analyze the information. The drill down levels, as many as you like. Obviously 3 or 4 is probably too much. And the interesting thing here is, just to go back to something that I was demonstrating yesterday within our WPF segment, is the new breadcrumb control. Here we have the breadcrumb control showing the different levels I'm at. So that's the home. I'm drilling down into DevAV West, that particular region for this particular set of things, and we're going into the headphones. So I can, jump back and jump back to home, or if I drill down even on another one, say, I can just jump back home. So the breadcrumb control in action here, rather than just say the File Explorer version I was showing yesterday. So drill down. As with all of our products, we try and improve performance across the board whenever we can. With WPF charting, we've improved the rendering of 2D line series and financial indicators. So there's less stuttering, if you like, as we're drawing the chart. So there's better frame rates during interactive operations as well, zooming and scrolling and what have you. So improved rendering there. We also support within WPF some new summary functions, min, max, sum, average count, and so on. So you can use those within your charts. So I think next I'm going to jump into ASP.NET Core charts. Now, if I remember where I put that particular demo. And here it is. Okay. So ASP.NET Core controls. We've had some improvements in the charting area for ASP.NET Core. Now, obviously, those of you in the know that ASP.NET Core, or our controls for ASP.NET Core, tend to be built on our DevExpress controls. So the improvements I'm going to be talking about here apply to DevExpress as well. Excuse me. First thing I want to talk about is ability to have tooltips on the charts now. So we can show tooltips as you hover over points in the chart. And as you see from this particular example, there is the ability to render the tooltips with some extra information. We can render it essentially with HTML. So there's some fun stuff you could do there. The other one, in general, the simplest version of this just shows you the value of each point as you hover over it. But certainly tooltips are now available when hovering over a point in a series, as we see here. Another fun one is, actually I'll go back to that initial demo here. Notice the labels here are visible for sure. They don't overlap with each other. That's always good. What we've added now is word wrap support for title, chart axes labels, pie chart and tree map labels, so that you don't get any overlapping of the text with the next label. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shrink the window and watch what happens to these labels as I shrink the window. The first one to change is the inadequate cheese quantity label here. Notice we now wrapped that because obviously the text is too long to actually fit in. So we wrap that, and as I shrink it, more and more of these labels, oh, there's a separate thing here. We're showing them on different lines. But as we shrink, more and more of them get word wrapped, and so that is actually now built into our ASP.NET Core and obviously DevExtreme. A couple more on talking about overlaps is I don't actually have a demo for this. We'll go back to that in a minute. So we have here a funnel chart, and this kind of overlapping problem has been around for a little while now, where the labels are basically written on top of each other, rendered on top of each other. So we've added a new feature now, and with the funnel chart, the option for this particular property has 3 values. One is none. We won't even bother. We just render the labels as we see fit, essentially, and so we get this overlapping thing. The next option for this particular property is shift, where we try and shift the labels around so that you can see them without any overlap. And the third option is hide. Basically, we try and shift, but if we can't even shift and get all the labels in without overwriting each other, will just drop the label, which is overwriting another label, essentially. And then the similar kind of thing with the bar gauge here. The option only has two values here because of the way labels are shown within the bar gauge. So here we have resolve labels, none. So we have the overwriting effect, which is can be annoying. And then we have the next option, the other option is hide, where we just say, okay, we can't actually display the label for this particular part of the bar gauge, so we'll just drop it, essentially. We'll not show it. And obviously, what tends to happen is you can guess what the value is, or you can hover over it. Let's go back a couple of steps. The other great feature that we have now for ASP.NET Core Charts is the ability to add labels to the chart, basically custom labels. So as we see here, we just have 3 custom labels here. So we're obviously doing some kind of presentation. We want to be able to show the chart with these labels, and obviously they're not part of, quote, the chart, unquote. They're just there annotating information about the chart you want to draw people's attention to. And that is pretty much it. There are other minor things, unless you're really interested, minor things about the charting. But, oh yeah, there is one other thing, is the React chart in package has been improved. That's still in beta. You can find out information about it on our website. But that's essentially it for charting. Paul.
Julian.
And do we have any questions? I presume we do have questions. And the team have been doing well. Yes.
All answered.
Oh, magic.
So, yes, we have already released 19.1, but all the other questions have been pretty much, well, not pretty much, they have been answered by the team, which has been fantastic.
Brilliant. Okay, so Amanda.
Sometimes I just like to make you sweat, don't I?
Yes, you do.
Where is she? All right. Yeah, thanks to the team for getting all those questions answered. I did see one just pop up. I don't know. For word wrap, what happens to the text as the window shrinks and no more word wrap can be done? Does the text get smaller?
No, we don't actually change the font size. I think at that point we either do not display or, well, let's try it, shall we? Let me just bring it up. Where are we? Or did I close it? No, I didn't close it. Here it is. Boom. Okay, so here we are. We're now word wrapping nicely, and it's getting smaller and smaller. We're going to switch. Oh, yeah, we get to the point where reducing the size doesn't reduce the chart size anymore. We just get to the final point. There we go.
Cool. And from Tony, will histograms be made available for dashboards in the future?
Oh, yes, for sure.
That's a very confident yes there, Julian.
I know.
Well, obviously, I mean...
The team just got told.
I'm not guaranteeing it's going to be 19.2, but obviously with the dashboard, what we're doing with the dashboard is we're using inside, the charting products anyway. So if a certain feature of the charting product should be displayed in the dashboard, then why not? We should be adding it to the dashboard support, basically.
Okay. All right, everybody. Like I mentioned before, today's webinar will be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. You will also get a follow-up email with links to all of our 19.1 launch webinar recordings. We do have 2 more webinars coming up this week. Tomorrow morning is DevExtreme with Mehul and Don, and then at noon tomorrow is What's New in CodeRush with Mark Miller. And you can register now at devexpress.com/webinars. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Paul and Julian. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.